All right. Welcome to the second Integral Emergentist Revolutionary Movement meeting. Right now on the call, we only have Zach, but I'm hoping that over the next 10 minutes or so, some more people will join. A lot of people did get a hold of me sort of last minute and say that they had something come up or some things, but I did also put out the word this morning, hopefully trying to get some more people. So Cecile is going to be joining us in about 10 minutes. I know a lot of people are going to be listening to this later in the recording, so for their benefit, I kind of wanted to go over some news. I had said that I was going to put out some kind of a document before this event. I just got really busy with work and stuff, and I didn't have time to really finish that to my liking. But what I decided to do is I would take maybe a little bit of this time and talk about what's going on with that, because I think it relates to what our meeting is doing today. And basically, the news is just that I'm trying to figure out some of our main projects and the main functions that we got going on now, some of the roles that I've already been filling. And I'm trying to basically make those roles more explicit and put other people in charge of those roles, and hopefully also get them to helpfully integrate more people into those projects. So, for example, I'm sure that many of you have watched those introduction videos that I posted about holacracy and stuff, and he talks about sort of the circles within circles and the different kinds of roles and how some of that stuff works, how you could even be in multiple roles within an organization depending on what works for you and what you're comfortable with and things like that. So just like a basic run through of some of the projects that we have going. We have our web page project and we have our handbook project. Those are our two main projects right now, but like there are other things like that, like it'd be good to have a media department and some kind of organization with roles around that. And that could be very loose. A lot of people could participate in that in different ways. It'd be good to have an integration department with different integration officers to sort of see where new members are in terms of their relationship to integral, to emergentism, and to what we're trying to do with our revolutionary movement, and see what their skills and passions are and try to plug them into some of the projects we got going. And there's probably a couple more. And I've talked to a handful of people in our community about taking on some of these different roles, and hopefully that's going to be the beginning of start distributing more power and responsibility and letting more and more people become leaders in this movement, and also me stepping back more and more and having more time to focus on some of the more particular things that I'm interested in. Like, that's what we all want to do, right? So getting the organization for that going in terms of some basic outlines and ways for people to plug in and ways for us to spread out responsibility. Then within those groups, there can also be these meetings where we apply integral governance techniques, and then maybe the leaders from those groups can also be in the main leadership group. That way there's some feedback from below and above, and there's some interconnectedness, and we can apply some of these tactics for governance meetings and whatnot. It all kind of will start to blend together and become this methodology and this structure that we can slowly start to build on. Another department I was thinking of would be the treasury/fundraising department. And another thing I want to say is that you can fill multiple roles. You know, you could be interested in being an integration officer for like a certain amount of people that you could take on. You have to like talk to the integration officer about how to get integrated into those positions. And you could also do stuff with media and get plugged in there if you wanted as well. So it's all kind of based on how much an individual is able to volunteer of their time. Holacracy was actually originally based on like the guy Brian Robson or whatever his name is who came up with it. He was telling me that in his mind it's like partially based on volunteerism. He's got a very kind of agentic perspective on some of that kind of stuff. So it's interesting to know.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, Zach?
Well, I really enjoyed the preview clips you put out, and kind of gave I think a good overview of like what the advantages of using a system like that and what it would actually look like. I think it. I gave a good introduction to that. It makes me interested in maybe looking into some of those governance courses or like the certification trainings. So I think that sort of thing would be useful, and like if we could get more people involved in that sort of thing, then from there that would make it easier for any member to start something that would be relevant in their own community,
Yes. Yeah, I spoke to my friend Paige today, who's in our group, and I was talking to her about she's probably going to take on that role of integration officer, and I am going to help her by taking on the more leadership training and integration side of it. So people who are new into the leadership, I'm going to be trying to introduce them to some of the methods and teach them how to play the game, basically.
Nice.
So that's going to be another side of the integration part of it. But yeah, we also have to figure out how to train other people so that way they can take that stuff back out into their local integral movement and practice there too.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, Paige just joined us. I was just talking about you, Paige.
Hi.
Right now, it's just me and Zachary. Oh, and Cecile just joined us as well. So that's pretty perfect timing, Paige.
Good.
Hey, Cecile, how you doing?
I'm good today. How are you?
Doing great. It's great to hear from you. I'm on the phone right now with Paige and Zach. So you said you're doing pretty good today, huh?
I am. It's a gorgeous day here in Vermont. It feels like summer has really arrived, and it's a delight. A lot going on as usual, but I'm excited for this conversation with you all.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking time with us today. I sent out a bunch of sort of last-minute re-invitations and encouragements to try to get people to come, and I heard from a lot of people they wanted to come, and a lot of them can't make it for various reasons, but we do got a couple people right now, and hopefully sometimes it happens that a couple more people sort of trickle in later, but we are going to have a bunch of people who are going to be listening to the recording of the call later. So did you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us who you are and what you do and how you came to do it and all that? Take over?
Sure. Do the takeover. My goodness. Okay, awesome. Well, I look forward to love to hear also a little introduction to Paige and Zachary, and David. I had the opportunity of knowing you a little bit, but yeah, just to get the ball rolling. Thank you so much for organizing this, David. I really appreciate your initiative in this regard, and the opportunity to explore this question of what is an integral governance system. For myself, I've been a social entrepreneur for nearly 30 years now. Holy crap, pardon my French. And in that time, I've launched nearly a dozen different organizations, ranging from farms to an online education company. In that time period, I also got my bachelor's degree from the University of Amherst, Massachusetts. And about 6 years ago, I took a deep dive into this question of power. Really, I was motivated by what I saw as just chronic, pain and dysfunction in organizations that were run by people who had incredibly good intentions and who were well-intentioned themselves, were talented individuals themselves with a lot of capacity, and yet operating conditions, were often just really challenging or lackluster. And so I dug deeply into both integral theory and organizational and individual development research. I was passionate really about finding a solution, a practical solution to some of the intractable challenges that I saw in organizations, and developed this body of work on power, which is really a practical set of communication tools, which we call Collab. And in practice, they, in action, seem to deliver much healthier, more effective, efficient organizations. And that's exciting for me. At the core of Collab are the integral lenses, and though they're not explicitly required for people to learn them in order to use the tools, which I also find very exciting, because there's a lot of folks out there who could use the benefits of integral, but don't really have the interest or bandwidth in learning more deeply what it is. So that's just a little bit about me. And I'm hoping today to give you guys a little bit more of an intro to Collab, and then maybe do an experiential exercise together to give us some taste for what this is and how it might support this group. So on that note, I'd love to hear a little intro from. Let's put you up first, Paige.
Okay. Well, hi, I'm Paige. I guess, well, I'm a stay-at-home mom. I'm 28. I got interested in integral theory through David probably between 5 and 6 years ago. So I'm just excited to be here and learn and figure out where I fit in, really.
Nice. Nice. Well, welcome. How old are your kids or kid?
My kids are almost 4 and 19 months old.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
And my oldest is a boy, and then the youngest is a girl. Yeah.
Nice. Well,
they're a handful.
Yeah?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. And how about you, Zachary?
Hi. Yeah, I'm Zach, and I'm 26. I'm been really interested in integral theory, but in this last year or so here now, and I've actually watched your Intro to Collab video, and also watched what you said with the Wisdom Factory. I thought was really interesting. Those series. So yeah, interested in. It's made me. Yeah, just want to learn a lot more about the actual, workings of the process and all that sort of stuff, so that I can try to maybe apply that to some sort of local organization here. So yeah, I'm excited about it.
Cool. Thank you. Well, welcome, Zachary. Or do you prefer to go by Zach?
Zach's fine.
Okay. Awesome. Well, David, I kind of wanted to circle back to you and just ask, I'd love to hear, from you, like, what was your inspiration behind launching this group? And, yeah, so kind of like what brings you here, and why have you brought us together?
Okay, yeah. Well, just in brief, I guess, I have been a part of the integral movement or the integral community for a long time, and I've also been excited about and passionate about what we could do to make social change and to build some kind of a system to help people. Originally, for me, it was like more about a more individual base. Like I wanted to try to maybe build like a mystery school or something for people like 20-somethings who are going through existential crisis. But like sort of as I got more into integral and started to figure out more what might be realistic goals and how much we could actually help people, I thought if we, I got to a point where I kind of realized that integral governance might be a realistic goal. Like we can't get everybody to agree with us. We can't move everybody all the way up the spiral, but what we can do is demonstrate a better way. There was a point at which I went to an Occupy Integral call, and they were doing very much like pass it around in a circle kind of style, where we would just all take turns talking about what we needed to do and how we needed to take action. And then after like meeting 3 or 4, I'm like, and seriously, are we going to stop just talking about it and passing it around, or are we going to figure out how we're going to actually take some action?
Yeah.
And so that became very frustrating for me. And I started like another group, and we had some calls, and like then, you know, I kind of had to take a break from that and figure out, you know, what to do, basically.
Yeah.
So that's like basically when I came across you, and we did the Integral Vermont stuff. And then I saw that like you really had, in my opinion, what was like important missing ingredient. What you bring to the table is like a huge structural part of what a systematic revolution is going to take. I don't know. That's not a very well put together sentence, but you know what I'm saying. It's like the fundamental ingredient in the revolution. And so I think we need to figure out a way to come together and work on it in small groups and invite more people into it and slowly build it until it expands and grows and replaces old obsolete systems.
Nice. Thank you, David. Yeah. Amen. Although that's not the exact word in this context.
Well, and that's where, you know, like we really want to get you involved, so that way you can help us with some of the training, so that way we can figure out how to systematize it and share it and spread it to make it go viral.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
How do you feel about that for your business model?
Oh my goodness, a viral business model? That sounds pretty awesome. Is that
okay.
That what you're talking about, though? Yeah, I'm really excited about the possibility of spreading this far and wide. All right. Well, I think on that note, David, it might be helpful if I did you know, a fairly high-level overview of Collab, even though this will be, some of it will be a repetition of what's in the, you know, the recording on my website. It, I think, will help provide a ground for us to converse today, and then I'll walk us through some additional kind of, again, experiential exercises, and you know, circle back at the end to identify next steps. You know, what really makes sense for this group, and we'll see where viral action comes into play.
Excellent. I will let you know if someone else joins us.
Okay, that'd be great. And I did want to check. There is a Google Doc with some key images on it. It looks like a couple of us are on there at the moment. If you don't have access to that and would like it, because there's some images there that I'll be referencing for the rest of the call, let me know, and maybe David, you could help make sure we could get that to you.
There should be a link on the actual page and inside the event as well.
Well, to reference the example you brought up when you were checking in, David, you know, of an integral group that ended up just kind of sitting around talking. I certainly had plenty of those experiences. I too myself was an Occupy facilitator for a while, and found, you know, a certain set of kind of dysfunctional behavior, and some good stuff too. You know, it's not all bad, of course, but you know, where things didn't work, there were patterns that I was really fascinated about, and not just for horizontal, non-hierarchical organizations, but you know, for hierarchical ones as well. There was a different set of patterns that tended to repeat themselves, and kind of looking more deeply at both sets of those patterns, my hypothesis became that, you know, at the root of all of this dysfunction is the misuse and misdistribution of power. You know, whatever that was. At the time I wasn't entirely sure, but I kind of took that as my point of departure, and, you know, came to rest on the definition from Paul Tillich of power being the force of enactment, to paraphrase. He says, the drive of every living thing to realize itself with increasing intensity and extensity. And I found kind of defining power as the force of enactment allowed for all kinds of distinctions around what kinds of power we're using to be made, which I turned into this image called the power matrix. And essentially, the power matrix has similarities to the 4 quadrants, but it's not the same. It's a different lens. The 2 polarities are autonomous power and collective power in the vertical axis, and implicit power and explicit power in the horizontal axis. And for me, this map became a function, it functioned as a map of the conversations we're having all the time in all kinds of organizations. So just briefly, autonomous power being the capacity of any single individual or entity to act of its own volition, collective being the power that flows from the will of many entities, implicit power being the power that flows from our unconscious habits and assumptions, and explicit power being the power that is from socially sanctioned agreements, essentially. And to give just a little bit more, flush this out just a little bit more, let's take an example of an executive director who is about to launch a new hiring process in a nonprofit, and they have a small committee on the board that has the explicit power to, the hiring committee, hire someone. And the executive director is on that team. So that team, including the executive director, has explicit power to get that work done, to hire someone. Now, in this theoretical example, let's imagine that there's some factions in that hiring committee that really feel strongly that there's not enough diversity in the organization. And so they go about, talking to a variety of people in the organization to try to enroll them in their cause. That would be the use of some, implicit power on their part. Yes, they have the explicit power to hire, but they don't have the explicit power to try to sway, to convince people, so to speak. And so they're using some implicit power for a good cause. Right, but using some implicit power to kind of get what they want. At the same time, the executive director has a friend that they think would be a really, really good fit for the organization, and so they use their autonomous power to put that person's name in the hat. And collectively, ultimately, the hiring committee is going to use their collective power to make a decision as to which way to go. And that kind of helps us understand how these 4 power types, so to speak, well, they're not entirely types, is kind of plays out in action. And the value of it is ultimately understanding, when there are issues, when there are things that aren't working, where are they stuck? Where are they hung up? Where are they not working? And perhaps most importantly, how do we build effective processes for delivering the healthiest forms of all 4 forms of these types of power? So that essentially is what I set about doing. I wasn't content with just a kind of a theoretical map of power, but really wanted to figure out where to concretely impact, what happens on a daily basis to give us the ability to generate more healthy environments for all of us. And so in my research, this idea that the power really flows through communication jumped out at me, and essentially as we work, it's impossible for us to do any work without communicating with each other. So it became a really, really powerful point of leverage really for how we flow power. And within communication, the lens of content and process emerged as well as a profoundly valuable place to study what's going on and to make a difference. And so just briefly, content process, two sides of one coin. Content is the what, process is the how. So for example, the process of might be a meeting process, decision making, information flows. Content might be things like the financial details, service or product delivery information, legal questions, whatever the actual specifics are. But those two are ever present. They co-arise every moment when we're communicating. But what tends to happen in organizations is that usually content is prioritized over process. There are exceptions for sure. Definitely been in groups that kind of fetishized process, and that gets frustrating very quickly as well. So the question is, how do we have good functioning, both of these things, both process and content? And in doing so, in kind of asking that question, how do we do this? The question was, well, what are we communicating about when we are trying to organize or be, getting stuff done together? So essentially, I use the frame of reference of organization as what happens anytime we're trying to do something together. It doesn't have to be hugely big. It could be very big, but it doesn't matter the scale of what we're trying to get done. If we're trying to get something done, typically there are some core conversations that we have to have in order to do that. And these form the basis for the 7 conversations, image on the Google Doc there. And I'm just going to briefly go over them because they form the basis for the process and content construction that Collab offers as a model for delivering healthy power. So briefly, purpose is one of those conversations. It's essentially our vision, our mission, our values. Why are we here? What are we doing? Business model is the mechanism for exchanging how any organization exchanges value with its environment and receives enough back to sustain itself. Strategy is really a question of priorities. What are we going to prioritize now to get towards that model that we've decided is important to us? Governance is the body of conversation that we have around who has authority for what in the organization. And things like what are our roles, our policies, procedures. And that governance is different than operations, which is really what are the daily projects we're doing, the next actions, the stuff that we put into action in order to get our jobs done. Conversation about the interpersonal is also critical and permeates the entire organization. That's really about the relationships between people and whether or not they're supporting the work of the organization or detracting from it. And then there's the individual or our own personal development, which is about how do I grow myself as a leader? How do I show up and do what I need to do in a way that's even more effective? So these 7 conversations are sometimes happening implicitly, back to the power model, right? Often they're happening implicitly, which is fine as long as they're working. But what often happens is that they aren't, or parts of them aren't, and we don't have a good means, a good mechanism for making explicit versions of these conversations that work better. So that's essentially the core motivation behind Collab is how do we do this in a way that's more effective, distributes power, and gets more done. So let me just pause for a moment and see if there's any questions about what I've shared so far.
None here.
I could ask a couple relevant questions, but hey, do you got a question, Zach?
Oh, none here.
I'm curious as to what are there universal aspects of those rounds and methodology? Like, because you're talking about the different conversations.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something that I was kind of interested in before because there's like different, maybe you haven't got to that yet, like your different rounds for dealing with these questions or whatever.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I think I understand what you're saying. You're asking, are there kind of like core modules that go into all of these conversations, or are they different from each other? Is that accurate?
Yeah, something like that. Is there something like that's sort of universal about the quality or the methodology of the different types of things you would apply to deal with these tensions?
Yeah, there are several. I think the one I want to mention right now, and perhaps once we look at the flowchart for the standard meeting practice here in a bit, some of the others will become apparent as well. But at its core, all of the conversations are doing a very similar act, which is that they're taking tensions, and I'll circle back and explain what I mean by tensions in a minute, and from everyone in a particular scope of work, and processing them through communication methodologies that are based on collaborative principles, and getting to clear outputs, clear, concrete, recorded outputs, which are then tracked, and feed then back into that same cycle of tension, process, output, and then it gets recorded, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of the core practice that's happening under all this, and it really comes out of a principle from ecology. As a species, we've evolved this tremendous capacity to, notice what's wrong, missing, or broken, and yet, frankly, in most organizations, there is no good means of converting that into food, which in a healthy ecosystem, that's what happens. Waste is not waste, it's food. Something else eats it, consumes it, turns it into nourishment. And in organizations, we generally lack that capacity, certainly lack it to do it quickly and reliably. So the tension processing capacity in the organization really establishes that equal sign, and enables us to take what may not be working or a great new idea and turn it into something that's concretely useful, that's food, that's fuel for the organization. And that principle is a great example of how Collab itself is a synthesized methodology. So it's taken the best of many different methodologies out there, from appreciative inquiry and holacracy, sociocracy, getting things done, lean management, business model generation, and more, and integrated that into one simple set of practices that take the value that these methodologies bring to the table, but make them much simpler and easier to actually use, as well as more effective. Because that was one of the things I found, was that in the study of the literature and methodologies out there, there are holes. There are places where these don't really cover the bases for what's needed to get healthy power across an organization. So that was kind of my motivation, and so yeah, the waste equals food is an example from ecology of some of the other things that have been integrated. And I think it might help at this point to just kind of back out and say that, in conclusion for myself, I found, and in practice now, 4.5 years and counting, these tools really do, measurably deliver a better organizations that are collaborative in nature and, honor both individual or autonomous and collective power, as well as make the best use of, explicit and implicit power. So let me just pause again, see if there's any questions. Otherwise, I'd love to kind of take us into some experiencing of this, because frankly it's a highly practical methodology, and so doing is a great way to learn it.
Can I ask one more question? I have a friend who is an activist, and she is in her groups. I was telling her she should maybe try to think about applying some of this stuff, and she was saying that there's a lot of interpersonal drama, and I was saying that that these rounds are actually good for that because they're kind of designed to keep ego out of it and to keep the conversation sort of online. She was asking me, like, what will you do about interpersonal conflict in a group? Oops. And I was interested to hear what you'd say about that.
Nice. That's such a great question. So a number of different things to say on that front. First of all, one of the things I found really helpful about kind of making the distinctions between the different kinds of conversations we're having is that often people will identify that there's interpersonal conflict in an organization. It's not hard to identify usually, right? And then what do you do about it? The 7 conversations become a diagnostic tool for identifying, yes, this looks like an interpersonal tension, but is it really? Because frankly, in my experience, 90% of interpersonal tension has its roots in a different conversation not being clear. But often people try to address it like it's really an interpersonal tension, and the trouble is that it's like trying to fix an illness through its symptoms. You might get a little relief, but chances are if you're not really dealing with the underlying cause, it's just going to keep coming up again. And frankly, it can really wear people out to try to like sort everything out on an interpersonal level. It often just doesn't work. So the first step is when you have an interpersonal tension, first of all, go back to those 7 conversations and ask, what's underneath this. Perhaps we're not clear about who's accountable for what, or maybe we are clear about that, but people aren't getting their work done. So there's some lack of accountability, which would be handled in our operations. Perhaps it's that we don't share the same priorities, and if our priorities don't align, well then of course we're going to be conflicting with each other about what to do. So my first suggestion is diagnose, and see if there's something else underneath that interpersonal conflict first, and get it handled using the right, process, quote unquote, for that conversation, and then come back and see, is there still some interpersonal tension here? Because there may be, and if so, then yes, you want to use that process, and frankly, Collab is a minimally sufficient set of practices. So what that means is that there's always room to kind of build on it and adapt it to one's own situation. But for example, within the interpersonal, it's not just a practice for dealing with conflict, which Collab has. It's a kind of step-by-step practice, which I'm happy to talk more about if you want me to go that detailed. But it also really sets up the expectation that any organization is going to actively cultivate their interpersonal in a generative way. And that could look like so many different things. It's really a thing that conversation each organization has to have about how do we want to build that for ourselves. For some organizations, it's going to be the annual employee party with barbecue, and for others it's going to be nice long check-ins at the beginning of every meeting. It's really up to the people involved as to what's going to work to build that, to invest in it, and to give it food and nourishment. And so if that's not happening in a group consciously, then that's also a great place to start. How do we positively build our interpersonal culture? That answer your question, David?
Yeah, that's great.
Cool.
Thank you
for the question. Yeah, you bet. Well, on that note, let's transition to taking a quick peek at the standard meeting practice flowchart, and that is on page 4 of the Google Doc if you have visual access to it. And the reason I wanted to I usually don't jump in such detail as an intro, but because you guys are a practicing group, it makes sense to kind of offer some of this detail as a place for you all to kind of begin to practice from. And as well, this is a format that Each of you are welcome to take and apply to other contexts that you're in. Now this is a 2-page flowchart, and it's a bit misleadingly simple in the sense that you can certainly follow all the parts and you will get somewhere, but there is a fair bit of nuance involved in, especially in agenda processing. That's where the rubber really hits the road. And it's, we'll get a chance to dig in a little bit here today, but often it's kind of one of those things where you have to go and try it and then be like, ooh, but what should I do with this or that? And just give yourself a little space to kind of play around with it and learn and integrate. But just briefly, I want to walk through this overarching standard meeting practice photo. And then if we have time left, I wanted to go through just an exercise of generating tensions for this group, and if we have time, processing one of them so you can kind of see what the mechanism looks like. Does this sound like a helpful direction?
Does to me.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, excellent. All right, so then standard meeting practice really is, think of it as best practices for any kind of a meeting that one might have. And some of the simpler sections are also really foundational, beginning with admin, getting your logistical details sorted for the meeting, whether it's virtual or in person. There's always logistical details. It's great to pick this up first as well because there's often people who arrive late, and if they're arriving late in the middle of admin, it's much less disruptive than if they're arriving late in the middle of any of the next ones. So this could be things like, do you have access to the Google Doc? Do you know where the restrooms are? Do we know when this meeting's supposed to be over? Who's facilitator and scribe for this meeting? So any kind of logistical setup, get it done in admin. Make sure you do know who your facilitator is, and have them, take the rest of the meeting through. If it wasn't clear before, definitely pass it to them at that point. There's some really interesting conversations we could have about the role of facilitator, and there's 6 other core roles which I found very important in ensuring adequate leadership functions happen on a team without having them conflated with the implicit or explicit leader of the team.
Right.
We can talk. Yeah.
So everybody could learn to be the facilitator, and it could be passed around every week, and it really doesn't affect whether anything gets done or not. They're just kind of playing the role of writing things on the board and guiding through the process. Precisely.
Yes. Yep. And similarly, there's a scribe as a core role, and they also have some really important functions for capturing information and being a resource during the meeting for previous agreements and stuff like that. And there's several other core roles, but let's circle back to those in a minute if you guys are interested in that. After admin, good to do some kind of check-in. It could be super brief. Anything at your way being present is the shortest framing I've found helpful. And it could be much more in-depth than that depending on the team. So the team kind of constructs what they want for a check-in. But it's important because it allows us all to formally arrive, and kind of with the use of our voice indicate our commitment to being present for this meeting. After check-ins, ops reports, and these are really the kind of baseline practice for collaborative accountability in an organization. They allow us to check in briefly at a high level on what we've done and what we intend to do. They also include check-ins on key metrics. The metrics are set by the team. They're going to vary team to team, but having a place to check in on them is critical. Also a chance to hear from other teams that bear on this team, get quick updates from them. So it provides sync and it provides accountability. And a chance, once we've kind of done the reporting, to also help build out the agenda, which is the next block. And agenda building happens from what I call current tensions, so tensions back to what I was just speaking of, our ability to sense what's possible for our organization, that is how we identify what we're going to focus our attention on. And typically this is it's important to build this from whoever is present. It can be done ahead of the meeting. It can be done in the meeting. Just all kinds of combinations possible for that, but the basic idea is we want to hear from everyone. Even if their answer is no, I don't have anything further to add. We want to hear from everyone as we build the agenda. And then depending on how complex your agenda is, it's really nice to have people present vote on the agenda as well. And this is a really simple, can be as simple as just everyone gets 3 stars and they get to vote for which 3 items they think are most important. And the activity of kind of collectively shining a light on what is up for a team is both very empowering and also really tends to drive what's relevant to the top. It's pretty effective and it's fun. So from that, then the facilitator is going to launch us into agenda processing using the input from the voting. They'll pick one item and invite the person whose item this is, and that person has a special role in this. That they're essentially the tension holder for that item, and their job is to represent that tension on behalf of the whole team. So, David, back to your question about interpersonal and ego and like how kind of convoluted and conflicted things get. Collab has many places in which it really invites people to the table in a way that has them thinking about the whole rather than just about themselves. And this is one of them, where they're representing their tension, but not just for themselves, it's on behalf of their team. And that means that they have a role to play in helping to identify, which type of output is going to move their tension forward. And from there, the facilitator will use the process that corresponds with what type of output they're seeking. So you'll see on that flow chart in the middle, I've got pattern, project, and person as 3 essentially very high-level buckets into which each of the 7 conversations kind of fall. So pattern includes purpose, business model, strategy, and governance. Project is about our operations, so next steps, next actions, and person is the individual or the interpersonal. And those 3 enable, once we know what the tension is, the facilitator asks, like, what's going to move your tension forward? And from there, uses the process, which you'll see on the back of the second sheet of this flow chart. You'll see just very high-level details on this. There's a great deal more information on the Collab cards, but in general, the goal is we're going to get to some clear, productive outputs, and those are going to be recorded, ideally in a place that's transparent and accessible to all who are on a team. And then we're done with that item, and we move on to the next one and take as much time as we have for our meeting. Before we move into wrap, which is essentially two important things. First of all, that the outputs are captured, which means that anything that's been identified as a next project or a next action is sent out to that individual so they have a record of it in their own system. And all shared agreements are then uploaded to a shared tracking location for shared agreements. So wrap, those outputs are captured, and then we identify or just confirm next meeting time. Sometimes that's not applicable. Sometimes it's just a one-off meeting, and that's okay too, but at least this provides us with a place to ask that question and revisit what we're doing. And last but not least, the close, a chance to just reflect some appreciation for what's happened between us and close our time together. It can be a good place to do a plus delta, which is essentially a term for just what worked well, what didn't. But really just a chance to kind of thank each other and move on from this time together, formally close the meeting. So any questions about that broad overview of the standard meeting practice?
Well, you know, I have questions, but I want to give other people a chance to ask questions first. What about you guys? Do you have questions?
Well, I'm following along. Seems pretty straightforward so far.
I'm curious, like, how this is going to be as it evolves, like, a long term. Like, I'm wondering, you know, at a certain point, do you see, let's say, like, the tension holder and the position of that becoming, like, very performative during certain rounds or something? Or like,
yeah, go ahead.
or like maybe going long, or like, or people bringing in, like, you know, like charts and graphs, and like, or like, do you think that people might actually make like big, you know, performative media or content outside of, you know, the meeting, encourage people to watch it and then appeal to it, you know,
Right.
within the meeting or something?
Yeah, yeah. Short answer is both are possible. Both are possible, and it really just depends upon the content and the team and the time. So not to be too vague, but you know, so I can give you some general rules of thumb here. If an agenda item and has a lot of detail behind it that the people involved in the, you know, in the team need to know in order to participate, and it's best if that's sent out ahead of time so that folks have a chance to read through it. Sometimes what I see happen is we get to an item like that and the tension's holder like, oh yeah, I have this whole big thing, you know. Then what happens is, like, everyone gets the next action to read over that before the next meeting, before we meet again.
Yeah.
So
I've also noticed that sometimes at a meeting that a bunch of people will basically have the same tension and like think about it or word it differently.
yeah.
And it's almost like whoever gets to the tension first is like the first one to have it processed. And I sometimes wonder, you know, like, you know, if there's some kind of an advantage of, you know, like to being first or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, good question. And I think that there may be. I haven't seen in action, I really haven't seen this play a significant part of people's experience in action. And that, but that if it, you know, I suspect if it were to ever really play a role, it would be to encourage proactivity, to encourage people to be sensing their tensions and bringing them forward. Ultimately, when I've seen agendas where there are, like, you know, 4 people have listed essentially the same thing with different words, one of the things that happens is that during the voting round, the whole team gets to essentially pick whichever framing resonates most for them. And ultimately, when it's done, you know, the tensions frequently resolved for all 4 of those people via that one item. So it becomes depersonalized in a way which is really interesting. And, you know, there's exceptions, of course, but in general, that's what I see in action.
All right. And things like the roundabout ops report, that's like where you can start to get a more multi-level or like fractal level kind of crosstalk between different projects or teams and stuff like that, right?
Yes, although in general, if discussion is needed, I recommend putting that on the agenda, and that you use ops reports as a reporting function with a quick opportunity for questions, comments, and appreciation for each individual after that. And anything that really needs a lot of crosstalk, we would put on the agenda.
Okay, so it could be a bit of both of those rounds.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I do have a couple more questions that I had prepared, but if you have, you know, we have a short amount of time. If there was other stuff that you wanted to do, I could kind of table those.
great question. We have about 10 minutes left. Unfortunately, I do need to depart by 5:45 my time. I don't think that it's quite enough time to do this attention surfacing and processing practice. But I do want to leave with enough information so that if I'm not able to make it to the next one, you have the tools to kind of try this yourself. So I think that more questions at this point would be one of the best things we could do together. I'd also be happy to talk through the integrative consent decision-making model in a little bit greater detail, if that would be helpful.
Yeah. I think we should go with whichever one you feel like more resonance around. I think it would also be cool if maybe sometime in the future, if we could figure out in your schedule, like I'm sure a lot of people are going to listen to this talk in this video and really be bummed that they miss it. Maybe at some point in the future we could do a part 2 and we could just assume that everybody has already been caught up to that and we could go straight into some practice stuff or something.
That sounds like a great idea, actually. It might be, again, in terms of my experience, this stuff is best learned in action, and so with a little intro, what I'd suggest is essentially holding a formal meeting for this group and walking through the process together to get to concrete outputs on the items that are up for people. It could be really fun.
Yeah, cool.
So, excellent. Well, yeah, let me walk through integrative consent then, because that's a really core module that factors into decision-making. It's not the only decision-making methodology that Collab integrates, but it is one that is very helpful for decisions that need to be made by the whole team. So just to mention the other types, we do use voting, but typically, again, in a very limited fashion. If we compare that to American democracy, where we use voting like a lot in ways that I think can be unhelpful. In other words, it's just not the best tool for the decision we're trying to get to. But so Collab does use voting. It also uses the advice process. For those of you who know what that is, it's essentially you once you have a role and you've been elected to it, it's yours. You can seek input from anyone that you would like to. Anyone can offer you input. But if a decision is within your authority, you get to make it. And in fact, the team does not want you to bring it back to meeting and consume time with that. We want to be able to use that autonomous power to get shit done. So those are two of the other decision-making processes that we use. But when we have a new pattern that the team needs to use collectively, then integrated consent is very powerful. It begins with propose, which is essentially after you've identified what your tension is, if the solution is a pattern, what we want to come to first is a proposal for that pattern, and it can be done one of two ways, either through proposal surfacing, which is essentially some open discussion, but only long enough until the individual identifies what is that, what proposal could they make. Or the proposer, the tension holder, already has an idea for what they want to propose. Either one of those two is fine, but we want to get it down, we want to get it in writing. This is where having some kind of a shared Google Doc, especially for virtual meetings, is really critical because it's just so easy to hear things differently. So that common visual reference is really important. But once it's down, then we move into questions and comments, and typically do this as a round, one person at a time, any questions, comments. If there are questions, it's the proposer who answers if they can, or they can delegate that to someone else who's better qualified to make that answer. And as a facilitator, it's helpful. Sometimes people have more than one round of questions and comments. Like after they hear someone else ask their questions, they come up with something else. So good to check just any further questions, comments. If not, then you move on to amend, in which the person who made the proposal synthesizes what they've heard in the questions and comments and makes any amendments they would like to. That doesn't obligate them to making amendments that they don't think are in the best interest of the proposal or their team. But within that amended proposal, we then move into the last, or the integration round, where we're looking to surface objections being something that would cause harm. And those objections are processed one at a time by open discussion to amend or change the proposal until no further objections remain. So that's the process in a nutshell. Any questions about how that plays out?
No, not on how it would play out. I would look forward to giving it a try here one of these days. This looks like it'd be a good practice.
Yeah.
And Cecile, you use this in your personal life too, don't you?
I do. I use it in any and all of my scopes of work. And so running a household, so you asked about my personal life, running a household is a whole ton of work. so yes, very, very much use it in our work life and even in informal agreements with friends. I've been impressed with how easy it is to kind of use this integrated consent implicitly with people. Just taking a little bit of leadership myself to facilitate. I can help identify what's the proposal. I don't know if for myself, I've been in way too many groups where we're all talking about what to have for dinner or whatever, something as really as simple as that. But it takes forever because no one will hold that role of tension holder and say, okay, I'm going to make a proposal here. So using this model, I can kind of identify and invite people in to kind of play some of these roles that make the whole process much more fun, efficient, and we're just not spending, frankly, wasting our time trying to make decisions in ways that are not effective.
Yeah, so it could almost be a type of spiritual practice. It could be something that you could do with your partner. Seems like just having this as kind of a mental map for how to take ego out of arguments is like a pretty great tool in general, isn't it?
I've been impressed with how much it can support that. That desire to kind of show up in a way that's perhaps less attached, and that's not maybe the most accurate way of framing it, but it really invites a different person to the table than what we typically experience in our work environments, and that's really. It's very cool. It's very exciting, and I guess I would just add to that, it's also developmental. So what I see is that over time, as people inhabit this new structure, they begin to show up in ways that are more full, more present, bringing more of their best selves forward rather than less of their best selves.
Right. Like not so afraid of tension in themselves or in others, and starting to want to engage with it more in a skillful and loving kind of way. It's like
exactly. Even getting to the point of being curious about someone else's perspective that's not their own, right? Which is developmentally that's a big leap, right? To get interested in perspective that conflicts with your own, but the structure really makes that easier and safer to do, and less threatening, and so it's easier to get there as an individual.
Nice. Cecile, thank you so much for coming and talking to us today, and I'm sure that we could get enough people for the next meeting. Do you think it should be a real meeting?
That's what I'm proposing.
Okay, well, I think that is that's a good challenge for me to get that coming together, and that's right on time. So, how far out are you booked right now?
Oh, at this point, I would have to look at I've got a conference in Austin coming up at the end of the month that I'm overbooked for between now and then. So, first or second week of August second week being slightly better at this point.
Okay. Well, we'll try to get that scheduled, and that'll be an awesome challenge for us to get our shit together and be ready for that. So I'm super excited.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your time.
You are so welcome. And yeah, I can show you just a little Collab in action here. If you're on the Google Doc, under the agenda item for tension surfacing and processing practice, which we didn't have quite enough time for here today, I gave you a next action to schedule a formal meeting. So,
oh, nice. I see that.
Yeah, you see that? Okay. It's official now, David.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'm happy to follow up with you offline also about, well, what would that mean? Like, a few questions come to mind right away for me, like, well, what's the purpose of this meeting, right? Because that tends to, like, really get in the way of having one if we don't know why are we doing this. So yeah, happy to have that conversation offline and or hear what you come up with today if you decide to talk more about that. But
yeah, we could talk about more of that later. I think right now, I don't know how if you have to go like right now, but I think it would be better if we could see if other people have questions or if we could squeeze any more knowledge out of you before you have to leave.
Yeah, I do have a meeting at 6, and so I could stay on another like 5-6 minutes, but I need a little transition time. So yeah, if there's more questions, I could stay on another 5 minutes or so.
All right. Does anyone else have any questions?
Not at this time.
Okay. I'm going to ask a question then. Do you think we could apply some of this methodology to other human conversations, like debates on topics, so we could establish what is officially agreed upon and not within a field? Like apply this methodology in an explicit way to like science or something. Like could we have a debate and come to a conclusion?
I think so. The catchy piece for me is this, that Collab is really kind of grounded in this idea of a shared purpose. And that it's within that shared purpose that we are doing anything at all.
Right?
Or have any reason to try to be making decisions together. Without that container, I'm not sure what would happen. It works really well within that container. Like we have a shared purpose. And so, for example, to take, whatever, a certain academic field,
What about like integral methodology as a core set of agreements and values? Can we come to agreements?
Absolutely, we could.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like
sure.
that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that one of the pieces that I want to convey or leave you all with the feeling of or understanding of is that Collab itself is a minimally sufficient or a minimum viable product, and as such, it's under evolution and by a community of the adequate, essentially people who understand and have used the practice and know it inside and out are helping to evolve the structure itself. And so over time, I expect that more and more variations on how Collab works in this environment or that environment or in this context will become more clear and available as a body of knowledge. But essentially, that's the model that I think would be needed to get into a particular academic discipline and, transcend what's currently happening of this very ad hoc consensus something, which is never terribly really, is that so? And it can take decades to come to anything with a process like integrated consent and clarity around the shared purpose of that field. Those decisions could be made far more rapidly and quickly and fairly, frankly, than they are right now. Yeah.
Absolutely. We have the maps and the tools, don't we?
Well, we have a beginning. I'm very curious to see where it will be in 10 years, and certainly invite any and all interested to jump in and make this thing the really amazing comprehensive tool it's was intended to be.
Yeah, it's a super exciting time to be alive. It's like
that's a nice way of putting it, David. Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Oh,
Right.
I'm so glad to have your time on this and your support. It's so great. I'm really excited for us to be able to work together more in the future and to spread some of this stuff and see how much good we can do with it.
Nice. Thank you, David. My pleasure being here, and look forward to talking with you all again sometime soon.
Thank you so much. Bye, Cecile.
Bye. Take care, everyone. We'll talk soon.
Everyone say bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Oh, so great to have her.
That was awesome.
Definitely.
Yeah. Anybody who didn't get to come and listen to this call and ask Cecile some questions is really missing out. I had like 5 more questions for her.
I'm sure you did.
Okay. I'm not surprised you had more questions.
Every time me and Cecile get together and have talks, it's always like ding ding ding. Like we always have like these great talks where I have like so many questions for her and she has so many great answers.
That's awesome.
Yeah, these different roles and how you're going to be the Chief Integration Officer.
Yes.
So part of what it's going to be is that you're going to have your particular role with your duties, and there's going to be your duties. There's going to be other people who have roles in that department, and they have their job and you have your job, and then there will probably be a bigger leadership meeting, which will have the officers from all the other meetings and maybe like another person from each group. And so then there will be leadership meetings, and then there will be subcategory meetings. Do you know what I mean? So that way there's crosstalk between both.
Right. That makes sense.
Do either of you guys have any kind of questions or comments or anything?
Well, I mean, I think that, looking at what Cecile was talking about and understanding more about it, I mean, I just think that having the idea of the groups in mind, like looking at that and how the different groups would communicate and how those systems could work and function like the best that they could. I mean, obviously, I think, there will be a learning curve, but it's good to have some kind of model to go by so you're not just winging it, and I think that the accountability is a huge part of that, and having some kind of guideline where you can understand accountability, and where that falls helps tremendously.
Yeah, and some kind of like a healthy balance between autonomy and the transparency of like responsibility. Yeah, being able to have that responsibility and integrity of your role. And so it's not like necessarily a position of authority as much as it is a thing that you're going to try your best to live up to.
Right.
Yeah, that I said this before earlier, but the facilitation training really does interest me. I think that would be something that I could get into.
Yeah, and everybody needs to learn it. We can all take turns facilitating, because the facilitator is not the leader. The facilitator is just a person who writes things on the board, who processes the tensions and walks through the rounds and makes sure that the tension is met. And so everybody needs to do that, and everybody needs to kind of understand this basic methodology and start practicing applying it. And it probably would be a good thing to start practicing applying it in your regular life. And
yeah.
I mean, this is Cecile's job. She teaches this. So in the future, you know, hopefully the not too distant future, this could be your job to teach this if you wanted it to be.
Right.
This is going to be something that's in demand. Like having this skill is going to be a crucial tool in your tool belt. So is there anything else that you guys want to talk about before we cut it off?
Not me.
Well, I've got a bit of an engagement here coming up, so I probably better end it here shortly. But really glad we got to have this call together today.
Yeah, good times. Very good talk. All right, y'all have a wonderful evening.
Yeah, you too.
All right, see you.
Okay, bye guys.
Bye.
You are currently the only person in this conference.